Hi, I'm Maggie MacAlpine, the Director of Cybersecurity Partnerships and Evangelism here at Seceon, and today we'll be presenting Achieving Continuous CMMC 2.0 Compliance, Empowering Customers to Achieve Security Compliance. And with me today are Argha, Keith, and Cory. Gentlemen, can you each share a quick overview of your role and how you intersect with CMMC?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Maggie. I can get started. So welcome everyone to a very interesting webinar as we face the intersection of trying to be compliant within our organization, especially those that are in the governmental space. As Maggie noted, Keith Johnson with Obviam, Executive Vice President. I lead a team of cyber professionals and experts delivering security platforms and solutions to our customers, specifically ones that are more around advancements in things like penetration tests, CISO services, extended detection and response, and at the heart of what we're talking about today, governance, risk, and compliance. I'm also joined by Cory Jackson, one of our lead vCISOs, and I'll turn the floor to him for his introduction.
Yeah, I'm Cory Jackson. I'm leading the cybersecurity consulting efforts at Obviam in the vCISO role here. And I've had prior InfoSec analyst experience myself. I come from the ISO world where I led a program, led audits, and sat on the side of everyone being consulted here. And a lot of this translates over to CMMC. I have prior federal government experience as well in my background. And my role is more helping the customer with the implementation, the planning, scoping, and making sure that everything is applying well to the CMMC journey, scoping POAMs, and the CUI are controlled unclassified information in the environment, which we'll get to later on. Thank you.
Okay. As the Vice President and of Risk and Compliance at Seceon, I, Argha Bose, lead initiatives that bridge cybersecurity technologies with evolving regulatory and industry standards. My role focuses on helping organizations build resilient security postures while maintaining continuous compliance. I work closely with clients and partners to ensure Seceon's platform, particularly AI-SIM and AI-XDR, are aligned with frameworks such as CMMC. That means I help guide how our platform is used to meet the requirements for protecting sensitive information, detecting threats, and responding to incidents, especially for defense contractors and others in the supply chain who needs to be audit ready. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. So I think we're going to dive right in after that. And I think our first question, the most important, is to level set with what is CMMC 2.0 and why does it matter? So I was wondering if you could just tell us about what we'll be learning today and take us through the agenda, Keith.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Maggie. Before I answer that question, I just want to thank Seceon for the strong partnership that we have. I've had the privilege to be indoctrinated in their world for over 10 years. And what I've appreciated is the fact that they pay attention to compliance and then they build that back into the security platforms that they deliver to customers. As Maggie had mentioned, we're here to talk about CMMC. One, what is it? Why is it important? Next would be who needs it? All right, from a care perspective, why should we care? We'll look at key aspects of CMMC 2.0. We'll look at the challenges in attaining that from a compliance perspective. We'll look at, can we get to more of a continuous compliance approach, meaning that we built in security along the way so that we're not scrambling at the end when there's an audit to be done. How visibility helps us meet CMMC 2.0. So obviously there's been some changes as of recent. So as we look to those, how can the visibility that we gain or get from maybe a different view, different platform help us here? And then we'll be able to, along the way, Maggie's going to have some really interesting questions that she's going to pose to the team here that either came by way of those who are interested in this topic or ones that we thought might be interesting to the audience. So with that, I'll get started. So as we look to the rise of the risk and compliance as key drivers around CMMC, what we see is there's a large amount of data privacy regulations. So these could be from GDPR, CCPA, but they are around this necessity to have a robust data protection, this idea that we get audited regularly, by oftentimes third parties that come into the organization to give a different view of our compliance. Sometimes I see instances where folks will have an internal auditor and, you kind of get used to a rigor, but you're really not looking to see what else you could do to strengthen and bolster. So I think that's why, especially in the governmental space, there's this third-party review that happens to give some transparency to that event. Next is looking at industry-specific standards, such as CMMC, PCI, HIPAA, ISO, because these are mandated specific security controls, risk assessments, and incident response plans. And what they're trying to do is prepare us really for these internal, external pressures that we get, because we know at times a breach will come, an event will happen. Heaven forbid that it turn into an incident, but because of these pressures, it's important to know that we have readiness around these kind of compliance key drivers, because investors care, customers care, and they're demanding it. Partly because they need to make sure that the entity can survive an event like that for a breach, because oftentimes there's a payout, there's fines, there's reputational impact, and then ultimately loss of customer trust, which would be very devastating to a business. And so if we can continue to look at our compliance, put security controls and measures around it, have third-party review on those audits, then we're able to then be able to meet and even exceed customer expectations, keep our brand strong, and then help those that have investing into those businesses, make sure that their funds are secure. Next is why CMMC 2.0? What was the drivers behind it? Looking at some of the growing cyber trends to defense supply chain, executive orders actually mandated that this occur. I listed some numbers here that you're free to look up. There's some gaps that were defined when they were doing their review from the 1 version to the 2 version. Some self-attestation inadequacies. Sometimes when we look at different regulatories, there's a portion where you say you're doing something and then you're attesting to that. But ultimately, when we dig in and we find out, maybe someone had overtly been saying, hey, we were good here, but ultimately we weren't. And then something happens and then that's brought up. So looking to kind of close off those gaps with this new 2.0. And really a need for independent verification. I mentioned that earlier. A third party comes in, they're independent from the whole thing. They're not inside auditor, maybe somebody you know. And so there's this need now for this independency to occur. And I know, Maggie, you might have a few questions you'd like to pose.
Sure. Yeah, let's just start with, so CMMC obviously didn't come out of nowhere. Keith, there's a long history of, executive orders behind it. Can you speak to why third-party verification became such a key part as the framework has evolved?
Yeah, I think, when we look at this, I think in the early stages, the self-attestation was the primary method of ensuring compliance. But what we saw as sophistication of cyber threats and the complexity of securing like these defense supply chains made it very clear that these weren't enough. And this is where those third-party verifications became very essential. Some of those key points are really around, when I think about it, trust and accountability. So by bringing in an independent person from an external view, it creates a layer of accountability and assurance that, hey, even though you attested to it, I'm going to verify. So you have contractors are now held to a higher standard. It does reduce the risk. Next is like this enhanced security confidence, where threats evolving, especially in the defense sector, knowing that the cybersecurity practices are verified by an unbiased view. And I think lastly, just the standardizations and transparency. So third-party assessments help us ensure that contractors are meeting the same high standards, leading to a greater consistency and transparency. Because as you can imagine, there's a lot of contractors out there that are doing some of these audits, and we're making sure that there's consistent view, consistent look and feel, and then ultimately that we're covering up some of our blind spots, especially in the supply chain. Where we've seen threat actors really kind of evolve is it may not be the entity that's of the target. It might be who they do business with. So a lot of times those that are in like private sector who want to do business with the government are the low-hanging pickings when it comes to threat actors, because they know through that they might be able to get to their final destination. So we need to close off those blind spots. And through this transparency and look from a risk perspective, I think it's probably the right view.
Fantastic. Cory, actually kind of building on that, if you don't mind, with the growing cyber threats in the defense supply chain, what's your perspective on how CMMC helps strengthen that ecosystem, especially for smaller contractors?
Great question. And especially for the smaller contractors, sometimes they may not have the right guidance, the right visibility, lack of resources, lack of budget. It could be just getting into that space and just not realizing the monster that's waiting on them from a compliance standpoint. So I think this really helps put some guardrails in place. And I think that's where we get to the next slide as well. But you have your 3 levels. So you can kind of crawl, walk, run into this before you start getting certified and before you start having an auditor kind of come look under the hood of what's going on there. So I think it really sets them up for success from the growth perspective of it to where you're not just implemented with a night and day decision to have to go budget for all these controls and completely shift your way of doing business. Because some organizations strictly do business in DoD, others have a small subset of it. There's a certain percentage. That's part of what we identify when we go in and look. But for the smaller subcontractors, that's where they need to have a starting point. They need to have a ground zero. So this really helps them walk into that.
And when you walk through those clients through what CMMC actually requires, where do you usually start? Is it an understanding their level, where data resides, or something else?
Yeah. And that's exactly the point, is where the data resides, right? So the critical data, finding that. And a lot of this comes back to the contracts. So to step back to CUI, this came from the old for official use only designation. So you have your government classifications of data. They switched this to CUI, so controlled unclassified information. And you also have controlled defense information. So considering where this data lies and where it's transiting, where it's stored, who has access to it, are all critical points, because there's lots of decisions that need to be made from a scoping perspective, budget perspective, and just overall planning. If you don't realize where that's at, you have wasted efforts, wasted money, you prolong the process. It could erode trust in the contractor that you're doing business with. So reviewing those contracts is key in getting the scope of CUI. Sometimes it's necessary to even see if you're within realm of that, if you are even handling CUI with a contractor. And this is where they're getting better at identifying in the contracts and spelling out what they deem as CUI. It's a very subjective thing for the government entity that's doing business with the supplier, is calling that out and what they require to be protected from a unclassified information perspective. And then that really can allow that organization to put their guardrails around that entire process and determine which level of CMMC they need to be at.
Actually, on that note, Keith, a lot of organizations struggle with understanding how these requirements flow down to the subcontractors. What advice would you give them there?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think from what I've seen is there tends to be a knowledge gap that is not disseminated in full. And I think that's why the government has stepped in and formulated these certification processes for these individuals to attain. So if you just look at the chart that we have on the screen, you see these assessments, and they have to get assessed every 3 years. And so where that kind of puts towards is this ability that they have to stay current in their knowledge and understanding of the regulatory changes that are occurring. They have to affirm that they have been doing it for a while. So we're moving from hey, I went out and I studied and I self-attest, to now being required to actually go through a rigor, a class, a full-on assessment themselves, and then have to do that continually through education and proof through a certification process. I think that is the right move. That's why you just can't have just anybody be able to do some of these level 2, level 3 assessments, right? You've got to actually be in that space and show the acumen around the rigor and knowing and understanding all the requirements, because there's a lot at stake here, right? So these are being awarded governmental contracts, and through that they need to make sure the security wrapped around the controls are vetted and proven and will stand the test of time.
Mm-hmm.
Good
So,
question.
yeah, and I think next we're getting into what's actually changed, these key changes. So Cory, this shift from level 5 to 3 seems almost like a simplification, but does that actually make implementation easier?
So yes, from a reducing levels, that's always nice to have less steps. I think it makes it a little more clear to the flow and how, like I was saying before, how you can really walk into the process. I think 5 phases of a compliance journey is quite a bit to chew off, especially plan for. And coming into the alignment with NIST 800-171, that's where the 3 levels really apply. So they're pulling from subsets of controls from that standard. So you look at level 1, you have a finer list to hit, things that most people do for reasonable cybersecurity today already. Level 2 is where you really get into that CUI talk, like I was talking before, and having to identify those flows. And then you get into your POAMs and et cetera for planning. So going from 1 to 3 is enough to really chew on already. Level 2 is a ton to really go down and chew off as an organization and plan for and budget for. And level 3 is something that most of your business is likely DoD. You're dealing with more controlled defense information. It's a little more higher of a classification. You might have some tougher requirements. So the amount of NIST controls that you have to abide by from those 3 levels were easier to cut up in 3 versus 5.
And the POA&Ms, or the plans of action and milestones, are now allowed in certain cases. So how are your clients balancing that flexibility with the need to still close gaps quickly and show compliance?
Good question. And yeah, so like I said, say from 1 to 3, you get to your level 1, and then now you're on level 2 and you're scoping it out. A POAM is great because let's say you don't have all these controls in place. The government's at least recognizing that you may not have the budget in this quarter or next quarter to go do all of the gaps and remediate all the gaps or risks that you identified in the initial assessment. So if we go into a customer and say, we assessed you against level 2 and you are maybe 60% compliant and you need to come up another 40% here. 40% can be articulated in a POAM and provided to the contractor, and they can approve and decide whether they want to grant you that contract or not based on where you're going with that. And that keeps you on track, just like any other, and that's where system security plans come into play here as well, which we'll do. And this really helps you chart a project plan over the next 1 to maybe 3 years and when you want to implement level 2. And that's really where this really comes in. They're trying to be reasonable on their end for you to be certified. So while you may not be certified, at least you can articulate a path and you're showing that you're doing what you say you're doing. You're hitting your milestones, and it shows some sort of good faith with that process. So that's what's nice about having that in place and allowing that to be in place. Otherwise, they would likely disqualify a lot of companies today doing business with the government if they required you to have a kind of flip of a switch, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think from there, I mean, the real question is why is CMMC important? Keith and Cory, can you speak to what legal and contractual risks organizations face if they are required to be compliant but are not?
Yeah, great question. I could take that one. So if you look at, listed a few things here that I think are important. So the protection of control on classified information is certainly one reason why it's important. It's required for the DoD contract eligibility. So if you are not spending time here trying to become CMMC compliant, then they're not even going to even look at you. It's enforceable under the False Claims Act. And lastly, it builds trust and security across the defense ecosystem. In regards to things around legal and contractual risks that they face, really there's legal liabilities that come into focus. So non-compliance can impose an organization to legal action. For example, if a breach occurs and the company cannot determine that it was in compliance with the framework, it could face legal challenges. We've seen this not only with CMMC, but PCI, ISO. If there's some infringements, they're going to look at the organization and look to understand their due diligence and care, because they're handling sensitive data, and that's paramount. So these legal penalties for non-compliance could be huge. And then, of course, they're going to lose their governmental contracts. They could face criminal charges. There's a lot there. Next is just around contractual breaches. many contracts, specifically in the defense and government, include clauses that require companies to be in compliance with the standard. So if a company cannot prove this compliance, again, they face the contract termination. It could be disqualified from any future bidding. And then they have the risk of just losing business with the DoD in general or any other defense supply chain organizations. And then lastly, really, there's a lot of insurance consequences, not to mention loss of trust and reputation. But if you look at just cyber insurance to mitigate these financial losses, they may not be available to you because you did not follow the framework, right? So they can't bail you out in case of a breach, legal fees, fines, paying a ransom, heaven forbid, right? But this idea that if they continually don't pay attention and failing to comply, not only carries the risk of immediate penalties, but also can threaten long-term business viability for that contractor or subcontracting. Yeah, great question. So I think why should we care about CMMC? I mean, all DoD contractors, prime and subcontractors, it's required. Defense manufacturers and suppliers, it's important to them. They care. Research institutions handling DoD projects. I think it was interesting. Cory and I have had the opportunity to speak to someone specifically in AI medical research that's doing business with the DoD. And that pulls into view, like I didn't even think about some of the ancillaries. So is there, doing soldier health, and they're looking at how they can better soldiers in the field. They're subcontracting to these folks that are doing a lot of research around this area. And then therefore, because they're handling sensitive data, they have to have that well defined. And so these minor kind of offshoot projects, you wouldn't think, and it could be a small shop, it could be like 30 people, but they're doing business on behalf of the DoD, so they have to care. And then you have MSPs that are supporting. So folks like Cory and I and others that are in the space of supporting defense clients, doing IT work, ancillary pen tests, things like that. And we may either on purpose or inadvertently step on, types of data, privacy data, classified, unclassified, whatever. And so we get pulled into view. And so it may be that we have to also attest. I mean, Cory and I we have to look really hard at, okay, what are they asking us to do? And then there's the DoD actually puts out some rigor that you have to have so many people that are doing security awareness training, and you have to have so many people that are doing, have a certain level of certifications to themselves, even in the unclassified space. So I think it touches a lot more people than what they think. But it's always good to be and have awareness and understanding, because it could mean that you have to care versus a should care. Great question.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think from there, we're going to start getting more into implementation, like some of the common challenges to this implementation. I think Argha is our expert there to explore things like, the resource constraints, technical misunderstandings. So Argha, what are some of the most frequent technical challenges you've seen companies face when trying to meet CMMC 2.0 requirements?
Yeah. So when companies work towards meeting the CMMC 2 requirements, specifically level 2 and level 3, they often, face several recurring technical challenges. Some of the most common ones are, I think Cory and Keith spoke about it, is identifying and classifying CUI, which is the controlled unclassified information. Now, organizations struggle to find where CUI resides, who accesses it, and how it's shared, right? And why it matters is because you can't protect what you don't know exists. So CMMC compliance hinges on protecting CUI. The second is obviously implementing strong access controls. Now, enforcing least privilege or role-based accesses is difficult in dynamic or legacy environments. The shared logins, lack of MFAs, or excess admin rights are often some of the common challenges. Then comes the logging and monitoring across the environment. Many companies lack centralized logging or real-time monitoring capabilities. Why it matters is because CMMC requires evidence of monitoring or auditing trails. Then comes incident detection and response, where a lack of automation, threat detection rules, or clear response playbooks are some of the challenges. This leads to delayed detection and poorly coordinated responses that makes it hard to meet CMMC response and recovery requirements. We also then get into the vulnerability management space where inconsistent scanning, patching, or asset inventory practices are common challenges. So CMMC expects a well-maintained, documented process to handle vulnerabilities. And last not but the least is the configuration management, which no, that lacks the standard secure baselines for systems and applications, leading to default settings, insecure ports left open, and making it difficult to prove compliance during audits.
Yeah, Arga, I actually have a question for you. How important is just visibility in general? Like how do this whole continuous compliance approach, like it's
Yeah.
one thing to be automated, but it's quite another to be doing active monitoring and then see that out in reporting. How do you see that?
Yeah, so visibility is a key aspect of it. I mean, typically, when we look at it, say NIST 800-171 specifically looks at infrastructure and kind of monitoring around it, right? So if you do not have clear-cut visibility as to what are the assets that you have and where does your critical information like the CUI information resides, and if that is not there readily available and known to the organization, then it's very difficult for them to be able to protect it. So that is why it becomes important for us to be able to identify, uh, see who has access to those, and how it's been kind of addressed both at rest and motion as well. Right. So that's why it is important that no visibility is a key factor to it during the whole continuous assessment part of it, as well as what changes during the exercise from one audit to the other. That gives us the capability to be able to control that. Okay. Now looking at no, so Seceon make compliance tracking and reporting makes no, it makes it simple, automated, and effective, as I mentioned before. With real-time compliance tracking, you always have up-to-date visibility into your security and compliance posture. No more waiting for audits to find gaps. Actually, so it is in a continuous basis. Its advanced reporting capabilities lets you quickly build detailed audit-ready reports to assess performance, track compliance, and align with frameworks. You also get customizable report management so that you can create, import, export, and tailored reports to match your internal needs. For teams managing multiple sites or clients, collaboration sharing features lets you easily share or clone reports across tenants to streamline workflows. And with automated scheduling, reports are sent out on time, keeping everyone informed without any manual effort. Get to the next slide, please. One of the key priorities when we were developing the regulatory framework reporting was to simplify and streamline the process. We recognize the challenges organizations face with most regulatory frameworks averaging over 30 controls. To address this, we created a common control framework that maps multiple regulations to shared cybersecurity technology controls. This approach significantly simplifies reporting across various frameworks. This has allowed us to group performance indicators, or KPIs as we call it, into common categories, making compliance management more efficient. Our pre-configured and customizable report ensure compliance with standards like CMMC, NIST, PCI DSS, HIPAA, and others. Additionally, our mapping documents help organizations meet certification requirements with great ease and effectiveness. Okay, next slide, please.
Yeah, I think I could take this one, Arga. Thank you. Just one question for you. It's very interesting, like the visibility that we're able to gain. But if I believe I understand the platform, it's able to take in all your telemetry of your different assets. So
Yeah.
things like firewall, switches, 365, endpoint. And it's able to kind of cascade that in a way to correlate all that data and then make that available to the framework engine. that then illuminates that to be able to say whether or not you have gaps or not within your NIST or even in CMMC. Is that correct?
That's right. I think the critical approach for us has been from day one is to be able to get all the information flow from various sources. It could be network, it could be from endpoints, it could be from servers, it could be from cloud infrastructure, it could be from user behavior patterns, right? Of them combining together to be able to analyze a particular incident or a threat indicator, as we call it, and then subsequently be able to alert it, and be able to get to a stage where we are able to see it early in the attack cycle, so that necessary actions can be taken proactively to be able to block them, and then take necessary automation processes to be able to kind of either mitigate the risk or isolate the risk from that angle.
Yeah, and I think it goes to point two here very well. So how do I get to continuous evidence collection where you're doing that by way of the assets that you're pulling into the platform, right? And so as you're making changes in the environment to strengthen and bolster your security posture, say around NIST, as Cory had mentioned earlier, then all of a sudden now things start getting and illuminating tighter because things are changing in the traffic that's being received, right? And so then that thing goes back to all the dashboards that you're able to then pick up on those nuances and changes. That then dovetails into the ability to say, hey, if I do a gap analysis now, what's left to be working on? And then that obviously forms into things that Cory had mentioned around POAM tracking, because what is up on our list that we need to be constantly aware of and maturing. And then lastly, if we want to go and just check ourselves, then we can do this on-demand and schedule reporting mechanism, right, where we can put some key insights or gather key insights and be able to do that on a regular basis.
Absolutely.
Yeah, perfect. I know, Maggie, you might have a question here specifically around where do organizations stumble?
Yeah, I was going to ask that, Keith, because obviously this can be really complicated. It's a lot of information. So from your perspective, where do you see organizations stumbling? Are they for example, underestimating the documentation or the costs or something else?
Yeah, I think you hit it right there, Maggie. I think underestimating documentation requirements is absolutely huge. I mean, when I say documentation, I see Cory sweating over there because that's actually, people forget that that's a huge part. I would say even if you've ever had a pen test done, I had the opportunity to talk to some high school students, and they were like, yeah, pen testing is so interesting because you can do all this hacking and you can get into an organization and it's not illegal. And one of the comments from one of the gentlemen that was with me, he goes, you know that English class that you sat in that you absolutely hate? Well, pay attention in English because you have to do all the writing, the report, and the documentation, and that could be even more. And I would 1,000% agree that the biggest stumbling block, or one of them, is underestimating the depth and breadth of the documentation required to become compliant. It's the proof, right? It is the proof of compliance. When you don't have or can't show, the auditor will ask you for the document. Where is this documented? Compliant isn't about having the right security controls, or I went out and bought this EDR platform. Now it's okay, well, what is the process and procedures and controls around this EDR? And then show me the proof that it actually is working, right? Show me your IRP plan, show me the output of your audits. And there's also, I believe, to be hidden costs around compliance too, that are often not really realized in a lot of ways. So it's the cost of putting in additional security measures. It's the cost of ongoing auditing, staff training, potential remediation. So if there is a finding, you have to spend time going to remediate it and then show the documentation around that. And then I would say probably one of the biggest blind spots is just lack of organizational buy-in. Security is not easy, and some people will go against it because it hurts their way to be able to go forward in their day-to-day, right? So they don't want to stop to deal with security. And so things can get bogged down. Maybe HR is not prioritizing the cybersecurity training, or finance may be underestimating the importance of allocating resources towards certain projects. It's this idea, if we're going to have continuous nature of compliance, then we kind of got to look at it holistically from a leadership buy-in all the way down to the technical controls and things that you buy to put in place to bolster it.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, so let me take this slide. So I think Seceon's AI Security BI 360 offers a broad coverage across multiple key frameworks with seamless updates to quickly adapt to evolving regulatory and compliance requirements. It also provides tailored reporting with pre-configured dashboards and customizable templates that cater to industry-specific and unique organizational needs. The continuous monitoring can be achieved with real-time alerts and threat intelligence integrations to ensure proactive compliance and quick risk mitigation. And last not the least is with easy deployment, minimal setup, and a cost-effective pricing model, Seceon makes compliance accessible and practical, especially when compared to complex, high-cost competitive solutions.
Yeah, so really you're not alone in all of this.
Yeah.
Keith, you were speaking to how complex all of this is, but MSSPs and security vendors, are there to help. They have the tools to help. So, as Argha is describing here is how these platforms can provide this real world support.
Yeah.
So, Cory, if you don't mind my asking, when it comes to solutions, how does a service provider like Obviam step in to support a client's CMMC compliance journey?
Yeah, thank you. That's more around readiness. And I'd say that's the key term here, especially in Obviam's perspective. There are organizations out there that will certify you, that are certified. Obviam as a company doesn't hold that certification today, but we have the expertise to be able to get you ready and align to that standard. We also have partnerships available to where we can consume that data in your environment to track your compliance efforts to create that POAM for you as part of a consulting service. That's where we would step in as well, create those system security plans, all the foundational items that are required to really identify your scope of involvement, your scope of risk, what your liability is, how you're contractually obligated. So we'll come in, sit down and review all that with your team and just go through a fine-tooth comb over your contracts, identify that CUI that we were talking about earlier. And sometimes it's necessary to go back to those contractors to further identify that. So bridging communications is another thing. Getting the organization to buy in, as Keith was saying earlier. Sometimes they just push this down to the IT department and realize, hey, this certificate, we're required to be certified here in a few years. Go handle that. You need organizational change oftentimes because you have to implement those policies and procedures on down through. And oftentimes in security is not there's someone's direct report, but they're more of an authoritative department, almost similar to HR. They can really use the support from the organization and pushing that down. And that's where we can help train them as well and translate to their sense and their business success, how it's going to pay off from a return on investment standpoint. So everything around readiness, keep you on track with that POAM, track action items, give you the exact details of what you need to do, or we can do the policy procedure documentation for you, depending on the scope of engagement that we have and how much dedication we have toward that process there.
Mm-hmm. And Argha, obviously these tools to accomplish all this are constantly evolving. For example, I know well because I'm there as well, but Seceon has, AI-driven approach, which is designed to make compliance not just easier, but more sustainable and secure over time. I was wondering if you could speak to that for a moment.
Yeah, I think we in Seceon, I think AI ML has been a core part of our product components. And it makes it much easier for organizations to stay compliant and secure. Typically, organizations would watch for threats, behavior patterns, track user activity, and keep logs so that teams do not have to do everything manually. And as I mentioned before, also it also pulls everything together from your network, devices, user activity, and cloud into one view, making it easier to correlate, spot, and fix issues at as early as possible in the attack cycle. Now, this not only helps with passing for organizations to pass audits, but also to make sure that the security stays strong and up to date over time.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. And I think what we want to finish up on, obviously, there's been a lot of information, a lot of really valuable information. So thank you for that, gentlemen. Let's talk about the benefits for CMMC 2.0 and also, some actionable advice. So things like what companies can do today and where to prioritize their efforts. So Keith, if we could start with you, if you had to give one piece of advice to an MSP or a defense contractor just getting started with CMMC, what would it be?
Yeah, that's a great question, Maggie. I think one piece of advice I would probably give is start early and get some type of comprehensive assessment of where they currently stand against their compliance. I think where I've seen is a lot of paralysis. They look at all these requirements, they look at this large framework, oh my gosh, I gotta get to NIST, and they just don't know where to start. Well, knowing where you are is a good place to start. I think too often organizations start jumping in with a sense of urgency, trying to rapidly like implement a bunch of controls and processes when they don't even really fully understand where they are from the posture perspective already. The key really is to do or conduct some type of gap analysis, like a third-party review, come in, understand where they are today in terms of their people, their process, their technology, identify these gaps as applicable to see the CMMC, and then therefore lay out some type of clear roadmap in order for them to have this compliance journey. I think it's that concept that we all hear about, don't try to eat the whole elephant, just eat it one bite at a time, right? It's a very similar thing. But then also right behind that is make sure all the key stakeholders within the organization are at the table and they're aligned. Because if you don't do that, then right out of the gate it's going to fail. Because if you don't involve leadership and operations and all the departments and they don't have a buy-in, then at some point they're going to be touched in that department and they're like, what is this? Why is this important? And they won't prioritize. And then it'll stall. It won't take root. So I think the earlier you can identify gaps, start working on them, and the more manageable it can become. And then with all the stakeholders involved, then it'd be less disruptive to the overall process of the business in general.
And
Oh, go ahead, Maggie. Sorry.
No. Thank you. I was just going to say, and Argha, just to follow up on that, but Keith, I want to let you finish your thought.
Well, it's just the benefits of CMMC that we've outlined here. Really, it's designed to support the organizations trying to meet it through all the levels. It helps organizations achieve a more robust cybersecurity posture by implementing and monitoring these practices. So again, there's progress, there's movement, there's not stall. This approach allows, and Argha will probably touch on it, this kind of more proactive monitoring and measuring as the journey takes flight. You can demonstrate this enforcement of logging of technical controls because you have visibility. And then honestly, at the end of the day, it's the foundation for a broader regulatory compliance. Like we can show proof. So Argha, I'll give that to you.
Yeah, I was going to say, Argha, are the best if you'd like to follow up on that.
Yeah, I think let me look at it from a aspect of somebody who's going to drive this, right? So for security leaders, I think from a good practice perspective is to treat daily risk management and long-term compliance as two sides of the same coin. Start by knowing, obviously it'll be important to know where your sensitive data is and who has access to it, right? Then use the tools to give you real-time visibility and alerts so that you can quickly catch issues before they become a big problem. Mm-hmm. Third is obviously automate where you can, like log collection, user monitoring, reporting, to save time and reduce errors. And then from the documentation perspective, keep your policies and documentations up to date and review them regularly. And most importantly, build a culture where security is part of everyday work, not just something you do before an audit. This helps you stay secure day to day and always be ready to be ready for any compliance checks.
Absolutely. And finally, Cory, I think we'll finish up with you. What's one thing, something that organizations often overlook but really shouldn't when it comes to planning for compliance?
And going back to what Keith was saying, getting all those moving pieces in order first before you begin to implement items of concern where maybe you already know in the back of your mind where your skeletons are as far as your IT infrastructure is concerned, or lack of documentation. It's all good to know, but not letting the problem become bigger than what it really is. Oftentimes you see this getting pushed down from the federal government and everyone's kind of scrambling, and that's where really POAMs really come into play as well. So I would say just starting from the bottom and laying a strong foundation is key here. You do all that, you get the organizational buy-in, because there's going to be added budget with this too. You need certain solutions that are approved by DoD if you're at a certain level. So getting all that scoped out, getting budget allocated accordingly, and going back to what Keith's answer was earlier too, is you don't want to go ask for budget and be completely incorrect, and you have to go back to your board, and then why should they grant you that budget again if it's not really relevant to where you're going? So understanding where all those CUI data flows are, the understanding of what CUI is and what your contractor or what the federal government entity that you're doing business with identifies as CUI, because one partner may identify it as one thing and another's going to identify it as another. So in determining that whole broad scope and documenting the flow of where it's at, how it transits, who has access to it, that in and of itself can take a few months to process depending on the size of and scope of what you're liable for there. So laying that strong foundation is key, and that's where this gap analysis really come into play there and set you on the right path going forward. And you can get timelines, budget, you prevent waste, and then you have more buy-in from the organization and adopt the practices as well. So you have not only credibility with leadership, but with the rest of the organization that's involved that has to participate in the process, that doesn't want to go and do all the extra security controls. They at least know why it has to be done and what they're protecting, and there's some buy-in behind it.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, I want to say thank you so much for your time and for your knowledge and your expertise. This has been a fantastic conversation. To all those who are listening, if you'd like to continue the conversation or get help assessing your CMMC readiness, please reach out to Obviam, Seceon. We're going to provide resources along with this video, and we're going to make sure that you have all the tools you need. So once again, gentlemen, thank you so much. And please, to those listening, don't hesitate to reach out if this talk and this webinar spoke to you today and speaks to your needs. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.